Welcome in Behind the Plate with Maren and Nate, and along with Maren Angus Combs, the softball writer for SI.com's Nebraska page. I'm Nate Rohr, the play-by-play voice of Huskers softball, and we have reached the end of the regular season. Nebraska ends up at 29-22, so we'll chat about the Huskers' weekend up in the Twin Cities. We'll also assess their postseason possibilities and take a look ahead to the Big Ten tournament. So, Maren, let's jump right into the pool. Huskers go 2-1 up in Minneapolis in a weekend where I think it was an even matchup coming in. The statistics were almost identical. Nebraska was able to get about as good a pitching, especially those first two games, out of Sarah Harness, and just enough offense to capture those first two wins.
Yeah, and it was good to see Sarah Harness come through this weekend. But yeah, it was very evenly matched, that first game especially. Plenty of offense to go around for both teams. Sydney Gray, player of the week, tying a record.
Yeah, Sydney's had a very uneven year when you think about it, because I mean, the overall numbers, the batting average is not quite 300. Does have good power numbers, 12 home runs, 40 RBI. She's going to be right in the mix for all Big Ten, first team all Big Ten, mind you. And there have been weekends where she's been utterly dominant, and I think this Minnesota weekend goes right along with the rest of them. And there have been some weekends where she hasn't done much, quite honestly. And it was fortunate that Nebraska got the former instead of the latter this week. Sydney hit over 400 in true road games this year. I don't know if that's just a statistical coincidence. It might have something to do with the teams that Nebraska played on the road. I mean, when you think back on it, Minnesota's pitching staff wasn't at its best. Wisconsin didn't have a great pitching staff this year. Michigan is the outlier, but she had a great series up there, so maybe it's not necessarily that. But I really can't explain how much better she was in true road games than home games or even a neutral site games. So.
Yeah, I pulled up her career stats right now, and looking at them, I mean, she's hitting 288, which, okay, but she has the most home runs she's ever hit in her career this year. She has most doubles she's ever hit in her career this year. As far as hits goes, her best year overall was the 21-22 season, where she had 57 hits. This year she's got 47, but I think the biggest takeaway for her is her power has surpassed all the previous years. And it shows with her slugging. I mean, her slugging's 577.
That's a good year. And those numbers improve even in conference. And, I've done a couple of interviews this week about, who's going to be all conference. Most people perceive Billy Andrews will be. But we've seen this from this conference, that your in-conference numbers outweigh your full season numbers. And the Big Ten, far as I know, is one of the few leagues to do that. So as a result, Billy, who has not quite hit as well in the league than outside of Big Ten play, I don't know that her odds are that great that she's first team all conference. I think she's a shoo-in for second, but especially where Jess Oakland from Minnesota looks better. Now there's always the chance that Billy can slot in that at-large spot, and we do see some of those on the all Big Ten teams, but I think Sydney Gray is the surer bet to be Nebraska's representative on first team all conference, and she might be the only one.
It's possible, which is crazy to even think about, because you just assume Billy Andrews first team Big Ten.
Yeah,
like, give it to her. But yeah, you're right. It could end up being more of a Sid Gray, and do we even get a pitcher on there?
I would be surprised. I don't think a pitcher. I think Ava Bredwell will receive some pretty strong consideration. Brooke Andrews very well could be in the mix. And I think Emerson Cope gets a look because her conference numbers are pretty good.
Yeah, with Sammy Bland, does she get a consideration?
The Big Ten numbers weren't great.
No.
No.
Yeah, you would not even all freshmen.
Maybe all freshmen.
Yeah,
I can do that. But let's get into these games a little bit. You look back, and Friday and Saturday were both pretty similar. So let's take them together. I mean, Friday, Nebraska gets out to the 2-0 lead through half an inning. Minnesota comes back, a run in the first, 3 in the second. Saturday, Huskers put up a run in the first, Minnesota 2 in the first, 1 in the second. And against J.C. Hambrick on Friday night, it took them until the 4th inning to really get to her. They put up 5 runs in the 4th and knocked Hambrick out of the game against Tecumseh native Macy Richardson. It took them until the 5th when they were able to get 3 runs on her. But I think the takeaway and the thing that you feel really good about for Nebraska is that they hung with it, that they didn't burden themselves with what they did in the prior at-bats, and eventually might have taken a little longer than you might have wanted. They made the adjustments they needed to make to the pitcher, whether it was Richardson or Hambrick. And they were able to hone in on them and get something done offensively and put together a big inning.
Yeah, especially Saturday. I felt like they put together 2 big innings in that with the 5th and the 6th. But like you said, patience. Felt like they were grinding and grinding and grinding until finally they broke through.
And maybe that's just kind of a microcosm of the season when you think about it, where it's just been, so much adversity, so much difficulty, so much going against them. And yet they've just pounded away. They've stuck with it. They've competed pretty much every single game and hung in there and fought. And however the season ends, whether it ends this weekend in Iowa City, whether it ends in a regional, whether Nebraska makes a surprising run somehow, I think that's something this team can take away with a great deal of pride, is the idea that despite bad odds, despite bad fortune, that started back in fall ball. Yeah. They've hung with it. They've continued to fight. They've never let anything get them down, and they keep coming back to the ballpark, and they keep coming out inning by inning and swinging away.
Yeah, and it's funny when we talk about this because I was reading Matt's game notes for this week, and the second bullet point is 6 players are out due to injury. That's what they've been dealing with all year. 6, not just, 6 is a big number, but then he broke it down. 25% of the roster is out for the season with injuries.
And you think of the losses there, you're talking about pitcher, 2 of your top 4 pitchers. You're talking about an outfielder who was all conference for you 2 years ago, and then played through injuries last year, and her numbers predictably suffered because she was really hurt.
Yeah,
even somebody like Dakota Carter would have provided useful depth for this team. Would have been a nice bat off the bench. Abby Newland, she could have played some first base this year. Now, Bella Bacon, to her credit, has taken that opportunity and really locked it down and played well over there. But, Abby Newland could have been in the mix there at first base. So this is a team that's really had to fight through a lot. And it's incredible as you look back on this year, how often this team has fought back in the micro, and I think it's because of the macro. It's because of all the big fighting this team has had to do that they've been able to win the little fights and come back in 18 of their 29 wins.
Yeah, I think it just shows what this team is really made of, because even Talia Tolkheim,
that's a huge loss. I didn't mention that.
That was huge.
Sure.
She gets cleared to play from last year's injury, comes back, makes a lot of noise, and freak thing, and goes down with the shoulder.
Yep.
So that was a huge loss. We're talking about someone who came in and hit 3 home runs. Yeah. Boom, boom, boom. So I I think what we're sitting at right now is thinking about, oh, what's going to happen this week in the conference tournament? Are they going to be able to string some wins together? I think they have the guts to do that.
Sure.
And I think everything they have has to be laid out on the field this week.
Yeah.
Because if they take their foot off the pedal for just one inning, their season could be over.
Right. But I think this team is well mentally equipped to play that way. One other thing I think we need to point out from these games, and of course the Huskers held off a late charge from Minnesota Friday night to win it 7-6. Saturday, you mentioned they kept putting runs up. They take that lead with a 3-run fifth, score 4 in the 6th. They win it 8-3. Sarah Harness, back-to-back good outings in the face of very difficult odds there again. I mean, you're talking about Kaylin Kinney, who's battling through some knee issues right now, and Kinney only throws a combined 2 innings. And if you would have walked into the weekend telling me Kaylin Kinney is throwing 2 innings, I say Nebraska gets swept. And
I'll one up you on that. If you would have told me Caitlin Neal was going to start pitching,
yeah,
I would think Nebraska was getting swept too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Neal, for what it's worth, Neal came out and threw a decent inning in a third. She didn't pitch all that well at Michigan the Sunday of that series, or the one game she pitched. But she came out and she pitched pretty well in mop-up duty and got the Huskers through the last inning in a third. But, this is a pitching staff. We talk about, what does this team have? What are their chances to come through the Big Ten tournament? They have the offense to do it. Defense we can question, but I think there's enough there. The mentality, the fighting grit, everything like that, there's no question on that. They are there. The question that has to be answered for me as this team heads eastward on I-80, can this team get 21 outs? And doesn't matter how, whether it's Harness, whether it's Kinney, Harness, Kinney, Neal, Emerson Cope has had some back issues throughout the year and coming to the end of her freshman year. But, we don't know what her status is going to be this weekend. Somehow they need to find 21 outs from this pitching staff. And yes, even get comfortable with the idea that a lot of the games are going to look like they looked in Minneapolis, where you give up runs. And what worries you a little bit is so often this time of year, conference tournament time, they're low-scoring games because everybody's throwing their best. And everybody is operating with that one-game season mentality. So it will be interesting to see Nebraska adjust to that environment with the idea that if it turns into a scoring fest, I like their chances, but they need to get that offense going, and they're going to be facing the best pitchers anybody has to throw at them. Yeah,
and most likely they're going to play Minnesota in their first game. I think, first of all, I'm kind of surprised they locked in for the 4 seed.
Yeah,
at how the end of the season after they got swept at Michigan, I was just like, how is this going to play out? But they get the 4 seed, which honestly hurts them a little bit because they're that first game. What if Illinois suddenly upsets Minnesota?
Well, we can get into that a little bit because here's the thing. On one hand, I see what you're saying. If Illinois upsets Minnesota, you're talking about a reduced chance at an at-large bid. But say Illinois somehow beats Minnesota. Don't you like Nebraska's chances better of winning that game?
100%.
At this point, and we can get a little bit into the at-large picture in a second. At this point, I don't know how much you can worry about getting an at-large. As things sit, if chalk holds, I think Nebraska needs to get to the conference tournament final. I think they need to beat first Minnesota, then Northwestern, and lose to Michigan in the conference tournament final. Like, that's their only way to get an at-large bid. With a lot of things going right elsewhere in the country. So with that in mind, you almost say, to heck with an at-large bid, let's win the whole daggum thing.
Yeah.
In which case, you want to play 5 innings. you want to play Illinois, and hopefully you can get it done quick.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that.
Especially with how thin this pitching staff is. So it's a consideration.
And it's going to take some creative thinking for the pitching staff.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't have the one horse.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's you go through the lineup one time with Harness, and you go through another time with Kinney, and you go through another time with someone else, like I don't know what that looks like. I do know you're not going to ride someone 3 times through the lineup.
I'm going to I think that's the most likely scenario, but I also think that if it would happen, I think Sarah Harness is your most likely candidate. And remember, she pitched Southern Illinois to a Moval tournament championship earlier in her career. And of the 3 pitchers who are in some fashion available for Nebraska, assuming they are, Emerson Cope, with the back injury, being a freshman, I don't know that that's a person you're leaning on a whole lot. Kaylin Kinney, as we mentioned, down the stretch has been very up and down because of some leg issues. I don't know that you can lean on her a whole lot. And so first off, it's most likely that you lean on Harness. Second off, this is where you're thinking about creative management of the pitching staff comes in, because how do you maximize what you get out of Sarah Harness? You start Kaylin Kinney, and you ride her until she is knocked out of the game, essentially, and then you bring Harness in, or you start with Harness and you ride her until she's done, and so I think this Husker coaching staff has had much to consider about how they will attack this weekend. One other thought, and we can get into the bracket of the Big Ten tournament. Playing Minnesota versus playing Illinois. Minnesota, you just played them.
Right.
And yes, there's a 4-day separation. Yes, Minnesota will have to do some preparation for Illinois, but the pictures that they saw last weekend on their home field are fresh. Whereas Illinois, it's been a while since they've seen your pitchers. Now, all that's moot if Illinois doesn't make it through that game. Right? And they just lost to the worst team in the Big Ten Conference on their home field 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
So let's not put a whole lot of eggs in the Illini basket,
Yeah. No, and I think for me, I'm looking at, okay, well, the fresh game for Minnesota is Sunday, and they've rocked Sarah Harness.
But it was the 3rd time they saw her that weekend.
It was the 3rd time they saw her. Now, when you get a fresh Sarah Harness, you're looking at what they saw on Friday.
Sure.
In relief, right? So I think she's going to end up being the person that they lean on, like you said.
Yeah.
With some creativity in there as well, because they're going to go, if Minnesota does win, then they're going to go through and see her for the umpteenth time.
Yeah, you're talking about 12, 13.
In less than a week.
Yep, exactly. So that is the probability that's ahead for Nebraska. Let's get into the Big Ten tournament bracket a little bit, and we'll start with the betting bracket games on Wednesday. Boy, Indiana is the 8th seed.
Can't believe it.
Did not see that coming. I thought they would be in the mix for the conference championship. They're playing Purdue, the 9 seed, which up until this weekend, I think would have qualified as probably the most pleasantly surprising Big Ten team. And then they go out and lose to Michigan State. I mean,
what are we doing?
Yeah. These are two teams going in the wrong direction, in my view. They split the midweek doubleheader against them. I'm going to give the edge to Indiana, and maybe there's a sense with them that, hey, we're in one game seasons. Everything we didn't get done that we hope to get done, February through the first week of May is out the window right now. It's just the game in front of us. I'm going to count on that, but boy, Indiana, and I know they lost Taryn Kern. They lost nothing else, and they're finishing 8th in the conference.
Yeah, I think for them to break that storyline has been hanging over their head all year, right? All year long, everyone's like, okay, Taryn Kern left Indiana. Now look at what Indiana is without her. If they need to somehow wipe that story out of their heads, if they want to do anything. And if they do, they could do some damage.
Yeah.
And they're sitting a spot above, or they were a spot above Nebraska in RPI. Two spots.
Yeah. Entering play on Tuesday. And frankly, I'd be shocked if Indiana got in over Nebraska unless they made the run to the conference tournament final. But if going strictly by RPI, which is the committee's tendency, they would get in before Nebraska. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. So maybe you're rooting Purdue. No disrespect to Indiana, great program, disappointing year. But I think for the Husker cause, you almost have to root for Purdue.
You have to, because if Indiana wins that game and goes on to play Northwestern,
they're going to get a nice boost in RPI.
Yep.
I would agree with that. So in that top quadrant, the top arm of it, if you will, going to the semifinal, I see Indiana coming through. I do.
I'm cheering for Purdue.
Yeah, I'm cheering for Purdue.
Boiler up.
Yeah. Me and Purdue Pete riding together, his Sola size, hopefully lighting the path to victory. Oh, if only. But I think Northwestern wins whether it's Purdue, whether it's Indiana, I think Northwestern wins that semi.
I would agree.
Okay, so that brings us to the Nebraska arm. And like I said, I think Minnesota wins that game. That Illini boat has been taking on water for 2 years. And it's only because Iowa was worse this year. You want to talk about a program that really got hurt by a departure. How about Iowa and Nia Carter?
I was just talking to someone about this yesterday. They didn't just lose Nia Carter. They lost a couple others to transfer as well. But I believe, don't quote me on this, but I did have this conversation that Iowa didn't have money for Nia Carter's COVID year. It would have been her extra year.
Oh boy.
And that's what sent her to Arkansas. But amazing the difference of last year's Iowa team to this year's Iowa team. Still with a great pitcher. Great pitcher, no help.
No, she was all they had.
She was it. And now we're seeing them host this tournament without playing in it.
They're having to host a party, but they aren't getting to eat any of the snacks or drink any of the drinks.
No. And honestly, I was thinking about this too. It reminds me the SEC tournament, it was a few years ago. It was supposed to be somebody was hosting that, and then they changed the rule that everyone was going to play in it.
Might it have been a Mississippi
State.
MSU. Okay. Yes.
I believe that's who it was.
Okay.
Because Ole Miss actually is not in the rotation to host because their stadium can't
handle it.
Can't handle it.
Amazing. Holding a facility to a standard to host the conference tournament. Hey, Tony Petitti, have you thought of something like that? Let it be entered on the record here that Pearl Field in Iowa City absolutely should not be hosting this tournament.
I think there's a handful of teams that should not be hosting.
Absolutely, but we're going to Pearl Field this week, and we absolutely should not be.
I mean,
that place was mediocre in 2005, and they haven't touched it. They put up that place in the late 90s for Gail Blevins, and all they did is they put out a carpet on the playing field and a big screen. There's no indoor hitting facility. Rutgers, that plays at a bloody high school field, has somewhere for the teams to hit when the weather's bad. Iowa has 3, intramural fields around there.
Is there a press box?
There is a press box, but it's small. It's just one giant thing. Again, I say it's straight out of 1998.
Is it like the UCLA press box where it's have you not been out there?
Never been out there.
Well, maybe that changes next year.
It might. All I'm saying is Iowa City absolutely should not. And to top it off, some of the teams are having to stay in Cedar Rapids.
What's the drive?
Like 30 minutes, but still. Why are we hosting this tournament somewhere where we've got to drive teams 30 minutes, where the press facilities aren't good enough, where there are no indoor warm-up facilities on site? The place is not good enough.
Why are we not playing this at some neutral site field that can hold everything?
I've long said, and oh, by the way, there's one within about a 3-mile drive of the conference offices. Rosemont.
Oh, in Rosemont. That's what I was thinking.
Plus a bubble. There's a warm-up bubble. There's an indoor turf bubble. There are press facilities. It's easy to fly into and out of with one of the world's largest airports right there.
I mean, heck, if you're flying into O'Hare, you got to look down and see it.
Yes. Makes too much sense. You know what? The conference would have to pay $10.42 to rent Rosemont. I don't know what it is. It's probably more than that, but they'd have to pay to rent it, and they'd just rather have it at the schools.
If a mid-major conference can rent Rosemont for their conference tournament, I think the Big Ten can do that as well.
Yeah, I would think so.
Okay.
All right, back to the bracket. So, we've got Northwestern through to the semis. Illinois versus Minnesota. We've talked about that. I think Minnesota wins that.
Same.
And then Minnesota and Nebraska, round 4.
Yeah.
You know what?
I mean, is it round 4? Because round 3 kind of got shortened and canceled, right?
No. Well, you're thinking Northwestern.
Yeah.
Minnesota.
Oh, Minnesota. Yeah. Round 4.
Nebraska needs to win that game. I would give the Huskers the slight edge, but I tend to see the world through scarlet glasses.
You know what though? I actually would give Nebraska the edge. I think they come out and they're ready to go. Okay.
So Northwestern and Nebraska in that top semi. All right. How about another disappointing team in the space of the year? The Penn State Nittany Lions. And oh, by the way, strictly on RPI, they're in second place in the Big Ten. By conference standing, they're 7th. Explain that to me, Maren. Go
figure that one out, because they shouldn't. I mean, they absolutely tanked in conference play. Especially
the second half.
Yeah. If we're going strictly on RPI.
Which the committee does.
They're in.
Yes, they are.
Without playing this game. And they'll stay in even if they lose to Maryland.
Right, which they well could. Maryland played their way into this bracket in Madison.
Yeah.
I think, you know what? I'm going on the limb. I'm going to say Maryland wins this game.
Yeah, I am too.
Okay. Wow. A couple people on this limb. Let's hope it holds. So that sends them to the game against Michigan. You know, last week I would have said Michigan wins this game going away. I think they still do. I think they still win, but the stumble at the end against Ohio State gives me some pause.
It's a huge stumble.
I mean, you had a chance to at least force Northwestern to win the conference championship. Yeah. You had 2 shots at it, and you didn't do it.
No.
I mean, up until last weekend, Michigan had a really great year for them. I mean, a great bounce back year after they kind of spit the bit toward the end of last season. Like I said, I still think Michigan comes through the semifinal, but I'm not as sold on them as I was this time last week.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that carries through or not. It's just tough to figure. So I'll pick Michigan to go through to the semi. All right, that gets us to the bottom quadrant of the bracket. So Wisconsin, the 11 seed against 6 seed Ohio State. I've not liked what I've seen from Wisconsin all year.
No.
They get in, they kind of back in, and Ohio State goes up to Michigan and takes 2 out of 3. Yeah, again, if we did this last week, I would have said, Ohio State's had a really disappointing year.
Yeah.
Did they just put it together last week in Ann Arbor?
They might have, because that's a huge series win for them. Now they come into the tournament thinking, okay, let's ride this momentum. Okay, we have Wisconsin. Let's finish with Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
Then they get Rutgers.
Yeah,
Rutgers is very beatable. We saw that when Nebraska went and won that series.
Yeah.
And then that would potentially set them up for a rematch with Michigan, where it's all on the table.
Yeah, I think that happens. I think Ohio State goes through to the semi, where they play Michigan. I'm not sold on Rutgers. I'm still not sold on them.
Not either.
They've got some good pieces on offense. I think they benefited from a lighter schedule in the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't want to deal with Ohio State right now. I mean, they are coming on strong. So I think that sets the stage for Friday, Northwestern and Nebraska, Michigan and Ohio State. I mean, the Huskers, here is where they're really going to have to find outs. A good Northwestern lineup. I do have some questions about how they're pitching right now, especially Miller. Ashley Miller has, at times, you even think back to her Friday outing against Nebraska, and she pitched well for 5 innings, but then she just fell off a cliff. And she had a similar outing to that this last week. This is a little different ball game than she's used to.
I was gonna say that.
Yeah. Michigan State, she pitched well, but there were never really any stakes.
No.
It was always nice if they won. Now people are expecting things from her. And it's just a different thing. It's a different set of pressures. It's a different mindset. And I just, how she's processing that, and if she's able to process that, I think's a big issue. And so, yeah, Northwestern's probably the favorite in the game against Nebraska, but you wonder if they're going to have to lean on Cammie Henry to do it.
Maybe. I mean, when you're looking at, Ashley's never been in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like Michigan State in the cellar.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's very different to go through the season playing at Michigan State, where there honestly is a no pressure.
Right.
Because your expectations are so low.
Mm-hmm.
Where transferring to Northwestern, you're expected to win this conference. You're expected to play well every single day. And you're getting to a point, I mean, they did lose 1 game to Indiana this weekend.
Right. So,
I think it's an interesting matchup if Ashley Miller is the horse that they're riding.
Yeah. And Cammie Henry can get them through this tournament.
Yeah.
Especially in the latter stages. But so that semi will be interesting. And then Michigan, Ohio State round 4. I can't ride with Ohio State for a 3rd time out of 4 against Michigan.
No, it's hard to. It is hard to beat a team 3 times, and Michigan is. They are good.
Yeah, great pitching staff. So I think we expect chalk to come through. Northwestern and Michigan. Northwestern won that series. If it ends up being Northwestern and Michigan, I'd take the Cats again.
I would too. I would too. I think our hope is that Nebraska can get a win against Northwestern.
Yep.
For RPI's sake, and if they can pull off what they did a couple years ago and run the table,
sure, could be a very magical run.
It could be a magical run. So I think that's where it helps having Liv Farrell on your staff.
Mm-hmm. And Courtney
Wallace.
Yep.
Billy was in that lineup.
Sydney Gray
was in that lineup.
Neal.
I mean, you have a lot of players who were part of that run.
Sure.
Still playing, and they remember. So they are going to remember what that felt like, and they can try to encapsulate that.
And hopefully those experiences are there for Nebraska. I think they're going to need them. Let's just take a quick look at the RPI picture as conference tournament week starts right now. As we mentioned, Nebraska, if you just simply go straight RPI, pull out the automatic bids, fill out the field, the cut line, RPI 44. So Ole Miss, the 13th team out of the SEC. Utah is the second to last in, which would be they would be the sixth Pac-12 team. Utah beat Nebraska earlier this year. I think there are those two feel like they're in, period, because of the conference, because even who they play in their conference tournaments won't really hurt them. Utah opens with Oregon. RPI number 31, and Ole Miss opens conference tournament play with a bunny bracket game against RPI 28 Kentucky. You lose those games, you're not going down. But I think the three teams that are above Utah and Ole Miss are kind of gettable, especially if things break right. And that would be the 40 team in the RPI, Florida Atlantic out of the AAC. Now, we should point out, Florida Atlantic won their conference.
Yeah.
Florida Atlantic gets buys on basically, I think, the conference semifinals. So they're sitting there. They don't play until Friday. They could play any of RPI 57 Wichita State, 58 USF, South Florida, 63 Tulsa, or 227 UTSA. Right now, Husker fans, we are all road runners. We need them to win 2 games to get in that game against Florida Atlantic, and we need them to win that game against Florida Atlantic. And even then, we need the numbers to break right. But, if they lose to RPI 63 Tulsa, maybe that dings them a little. If it's Wichita State, that doesn't help Nebraska.
No.
Flat out, because Wichita State hammered the Huskers. The other two that I think are kind of vulnerable, RPI 38, RPI 39, UCF, and Texas Tech, both out of the Big 12. Now,
Texas Tech just got annihilated.
Yeah. If we had to pick a national championship favorite right now, it's not
Oklahoma.
I think it's the team in burnt orange down there. But yeah. I don't think we're going to get much help out of UCF. They play RPI number 18 Baylor in the Big 12 first round. They're going to stay at 38.
Here's the other thing to keep in mind really quick with the Big 12 tournament. I feel like every year there is weather.
Mm-hmm.
And the Big 12, it's happened before where the whole tournament has gotten rained out.
Sure.
So keep that in mind.
Sure.
Especially with the crazy weather that we've been having.
Mm-hmm.
So it could happen again.
Yeah, it could. And there, maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. I will say this. So RPI 38 UCF, they're probably staying there with Baylor, right. Playing Baylor. RPI 39 Texas Tech. First round game, 86th ranked Iowa State. Remember how I said we're all Roadrunners?
Oh,
we are all Cyclones too. ISU and Nebraska. Come on. Team Farmageddon. Let's go. Hey, we both hate Iowa. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We're friends. Let's go.
All right.
Other than that, I'm not so sure I see a whole lot of help. I mean, there's maybe a little more help behind Nebraska to help keep teams at bay. Indiana, we mentioned their RPI 45. They play RPI 88 Purdue. Kansas at 46. There again, that's Nebraska's best win, but they play RPI 89 Houston. So if they were to lose in the first round, I think that would drop them.
That would also drop Nebraska.
Yeah, therein lies the difficulty. Yeah. Yep. And then Ohio State, they have RPI 108 Wisconsin first round. Yeah, but Ohio State is surging. But if somehow Wisconsin were to win that game, that would tag Ohio State out. So I think the bottom line is this, and Maren, you can correct me if I'm wrong. There's a pretty small, narrow alley to get the Huskers into a regional without winning the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah.
I think that's the bottom line.
Bottom line, go win the whole thing.
Yep. And you know, like we said, scrappy team, very tough, very gritty, veteran. They've done it before. You know, you feel like you could have gotten at least one against Michigan. You feel like you should have gotten at least one against Northwestern, leading 5-0 in the third. But you're going to need it all this weekend.
Here's an idea. The Big Ten is not going to have a top 16 seed, right? So your top seeds from the Big Ten, Northwestern, Michigan, are going in as 2 seeds no matter what.
At best.
It doesn't matter how they finish in this tournament. They are 2 seeds at best. If you want to get another team in the tournament, I'm not saying, you know,
don't tilt it, but maybe Sarah Harness gets a pitch or 2 on the black that Lauren Durkowski does not.
Yeah.
Dare to dream. Hey, try that with Carol Hutchins in the dugout. See how you come out.
You know, she's not in the dugout anymore. So.
Indeed. Hey, game doesn't change. All right. Well, hopefully this is not the last week we are previewing Huskers softball's weekend. Hopefully Nebraska will have a regional bid, but one way or another, whether the Huskers are in regionals or not, we'll be back next week to review the Huskers' run in the Big Ten tournament and get you ready for the NCAA regionals. For Maren and Angus Combs, I'm Nate Rohr. Thanks for listening.